Hello, and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. I have my God the Father t-shirt on and my Dune movie right next to me. And you're probably wondering, why does he have his God the Father t-shirt on and his Dune movie next to him? Well, that's because today I'm actually going to be tackling something that I tried to film a little while back, and I actually just spent like an hour talking about without having my microphone on. So, yeah. Duh! Excuse me one second, because I've been talking for an hour, I'm going to grab a little bit of something to drink. I'm stupid. I didn't even notice that. I was so hard up to try to get going on filming that I just didn't think to check my microphone settings. Okay, so, for those of you that may or may not know, okay, if you've been around my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I reviewed, not long ago, this movie, okay? Actually, it's been almost a couple years now, because it was back in October of 2021 when I actually did the original video, and then in about November, I think it was, of 2021, I had sat down and I had watched basic versions of Dune and compared them to this one in a video to kind of talk about, like, what were shades of Harrison, what were shades of Lynch, and what were Denis Villeneuve, you know? And that was something that, to me, has been amazing to actually sit down and watch. Was every time I watch this version of Dune, it just blows me away how much information that man could cram into, like, a 2-hour movie. I mean, I believe it was about 2 hours. Well, it doesn't say. But 155 minutes. So, about 2 hours and 35 minutes. Which isn't bad. I mean, for 2 hours and 35 minutes, they crammed a hell of a lot of shit in this. Okay? And as I was saying when I first started, let me see here. They crammed about about that much into that. Now, it's not 100%. I'm not saying they crammed every single thing that was on the pages of the book into the movie there, but they did a damn good job of adapting about half the book. Okay? And that's about half into that. Okay? The only thing they didn't do was, there is one scene where Esmar Tuek, the smuggler, welcomes Gurney Halleck into his retinue. And then a little later on, in the third book, you get the scene where, you know, Gurney and Paul meet up. So, I just have to say this. I'm a Dune fan. Okay? And one of my first introductions to Frank Herbert's universe was this movie right here. Okay? The David Lynch 1984 version of Dune. Okay? This I used to see sitting on a shelf at my local video store. Okay? Because those were a thing. People talk about Blockbusters and stuff like that. Well, we had little mom and pop shops here. Okay? That had a whole bunch of different places. And sometimes, okay, depending on the size of the place, they would have, you know, these big sections of different things. So, like, they had, like, a sci-fi and fantasy section. They had a kids section. They had, you know, just a regular movie section where they had, like, action-adventure films and dramas and all that kind of stuff. And it was actually one of the first ones that I ever saw. One of my first ever R-rated films that I watched, which was this guy, Punisher. Because being a huge Punisher fan, as well as being a Dune fan, I was like, hell yeah! Even though the story was completely off. But anyway, so getting back to what I was saying. So this version right here, this version, the David Lynch version, was my first introduction to Dune. And I remember seeing this cover and kind of like seeing all these little ships that were coming down, and seeing the moon, and seeing the desert planet, and he's standing in this kind of like black garb with like this little, contraption on his shoulder and these ropes across his chest, and I'm thinking, it looks science fiction-y, I mean, I've seen Star Wars a few times. I mean, it kind of looks like that. Not realizing that George Lucas had used this book as his inspiration. So one day, because I was about 13 at the time, I said to I said, because I could start renting PG-13 movies, I just walked over, I picked it off the shelf, and I walked up, and I handed it over, and they handed me the movie, and I took it home, and I watched it. And I went, and I sat there afterwards going, what the fuck did I just watch? And so then I went to the library, and I was just kind of milling around, and I happened to walk by in the fiction section, and I happened to walk by the H's just on a lark, and I happened to see this book. It said, Dune, Herbert. And I went, I wonder if that's the same as this. Not knowing that it was, because, I mean, and yes, I had seen Frank Herbert, so I was kind of like, but all it said, it did not say Frank Herbert, it just, because it was hardback, it said Dune, Herbert. And that's it. So I thought, okay. So I picked it off the shelf, took it home, and read it. And I was blown away. I'm 43 now. So I've been reading this book for 30 years now. Okay? I absolutely love this book. Now in 2000, John Harrison, a writer-director, sat down with the idea of adapting Dune into a miniseries for, at the time, it was known as Sci-Fi Channel. Okay? And it wasn't S-Y-F-Y. It was actually S-C-I-F-I. Spelled like it's supposed to be. Okay? They hadn't rebranded yet. This version, to me, was the definitive version of Dune. Up until this came out. Okay? Because to me, this came the closest to actually giving us what was in here. There were no weirding modules. There was no, like really stupid, weird sci-fi crap. There was no heart plugs. There was no floating. I mean, there was a floating Baron, but he wasn't doing what Kenneth McMillan was doing, which was like floating way up in the air. Ian McNeice was more just kind of moving slowly over things. And there were a few times when he would go way up in the air, but it wasn't too bad. Okay? That being said, excellent version. I'd recommend it. Okay? If you have not seen it yet, sit down and watch it. Okay? Now, a little while ago, a few years now, but a little while ago, I came across this version of Dune. Okay? And what this is a steelbook version of Dune that has two versions of the film. It's got the original theatrical and the extended version. Okay? And all the extended version does is it adds in a few scenes that were cut from David Lynch's original version. Now, David Lynch's original version runs 2 hours, 17 minutes. And it tells the plot of the entire book. But it makes Paul into this heroic messiah. That's not who he is in the book. Okay, in the book, he's the reluctant messiah. Okay, and that's the one thing that I loved about the Harrison version. That's why I say that the Harrison version does a better job of telling the whole story. Now, this one hits a lot of the highlights. Okay, especially the extended version. Okay, now Lynch didn't have anything to do with the extended version. Okay, this was actually done by some other people, and they threw it in there, and they said, we want to kind of, make this extended version. They actually asked David Lynch if he would want to come back and have a hand in it. He said no. So, and he said, don't put my name on the extended version. So, the extended version is under the pseudonym Alan Smithee, which is what they do when a director says, don't put my name on something. Then they put it under the name Alan Smithee, okay? It's just a pseudonym. Nobody cares, okay? Which, I will say, for what it is, the extended version actually does a really good job of telling the story. A lot better than this version. Okay? And then, a couple years after John Harrison did the Sci-Fi Channel version of Dune, he did the sequels, okay, which was Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. Okay, adapted it as a 3-part miniseries because the first one was a 3-part miniseries, and he figured, we could probably adapt them into a 3-part miniseries. So they did. This is actually, outside of a brief cameo in a couple of episodes of Band of Brothers, James McAvoy's first full-length Hollywood feature. Okay? This was years before he blew up. I mean, nobody really knew who he was. I had only known who he was because I had seen him in a couple of other things. And I think the movie that he did right after this was Atonement, which is really where he blew up, was in Atonement. But other than that, this version of Dune, it's okay. I mean, it's pretty good. And longtime Star Trek Voyager director Greg Yataines did directed this, which, I mean, it was pretty good. And Harrison and Rubinstein, who did this and this, produced this. So, I mean, it's a pretty good film. I would say that if you're interested in it, give it a watch. Okay? Now, that being said, okay, let me just say this. Because of these two Dunes, okay, the Harrison and the Lynch, I actually walked into this version thinking that it was going to be a crap fest. Honestly. Because up to this point, while we have gotten versions of Dune, we hadn't gotten Dune. Okay? Things have been changed around, characters were switched, things had happened, and stuff just kind of got thrown out. And so, I said this in my review of this movie, I went into this movie with my bar of expectations being on the floor. Okay? Because I was expecting it to be a total crap fest, to be honest. Okay? I was not expecting the quality that this is. Let's put it that way. Okay? This film, light years beyond anything done before. Okay? Light years beyond. And that's because Denis Villeneuve knows how to craft a story and how to tell said story both visually and with very little words. But he can pack a lot into a little in each scene, which is one of the things that Frank Herbert did in this book. Every single page of this book is dripping with subtext and subtlety and political intrigue and religion and terrible purpose, and there's just so much packed into this one thing. And like I said, I've been reading this thing for 30 years, and I'm still discovering things now 30 years later, I'm still discovering things. I'm reading it again. Okay, this is my bookmark from where I'm at right now. Okay, I'm about 60 pages in, and I'm still having fun reading this book because it is so good. And I'm still, like, when I read things, I discover something brand new that I hadn't before. The thing is, on like the third or fourth watch of this Dune, I'd already seen it. I already knew it. Because what I would do is I would go, and I think I tried to tell this story the last time when I realized that all my stuff was gone. Okay? When I saw this sitting on there, and then I took the book home and I read it, okay? Thus began a cycle for about 10 years of me reading the book, watching the film. Reading the book, watching the film. Reading the book, watching the film. Because the film was so compacted that to understand certain parts of what they were trying to adapt from the novel into here, you had to really sit down and read the novel and then go back and watch the film, and then that made you want to go back and read the novel because the novel had so much more in it. And it was like, oh my gosh. And it wasn't until I went to college in 2000 that we found out that the Sci-Fi Channel was doing this version of Dune, and I bought the VHS. It was a like a Braveheart style. I don't think I have Braveheart here, but it was or I don't have a double. But basically, what it was, if you can imagine, think of it this way, okay? This version here was like this, okay? It basically had like the first couple of episodes, or had like the first episode and a half or something, and then it's like on the second one it had the end of the second and then the third episode. And so basically in watching that version, and this is one of the reasons why I say, okay, and this is me again, this is one of the reasons why I say that this version was the definitive version, is because it adapted all three parts of Dune. And the three parts of Dune are Dune, Muad'Dib, and the Prophet. Okay? And it's sort of like looking at Lord of the Rings, right? There's Fellowship of the Ring, there's the Two Towers, and there's Return of the King, right? Pretty simple. Beyond that, okay, Dune had never, up until Harrison, had never had that type of treatment. Because all we had was this version of Dune, okay, the Lynch version. Which, again, admittedly, for the only version that we had, it was okay. And now, there are some hardcore purists out there that are like, the Lynch version is the only version, the Harrison version sucks. And I'm like, no, the Harrison version is actually really good once you get to really sit down and watch it. Okay, I think what most people do is they get about, 5 minutes into it, and they see a couple of the planets, and they kind of go, oh, it looks like a high school, play. But what they failed to see is that Harrison went for mostly no-names. In fact, before this version, the Harrison version, I did not know who Ian McNeice was. And Ian McNeice actually went on to star in White Noise with Michael Keaton. And Saskia Reeves, what's interesting is that in 1999, okay, TNT did a version of A Christmas Carol with Patrick Stewart. Okay? This is actually one of my favorite versions of A Christmas Carol, to be honest. Okay? Now, funny thing. Not only is Patrick Stewart in this, who played Gurney Halleck in this version of Dune, it also has Ian McNeice, who plays Fezziwig, and Saskia Reeves, who plays Cratchit's wife. Ian McNeice played Baron Harkonnen in this version of Dune, and Saskia Reeves played Jessica in this version of Dune. Go figure! I mean, it's like, what the hell? But, I mean, again, it's like one of those things where it's like, holy cow. And then, of course, they had Dominic West in there, too, who plays Scrooge's nephew, and he does a really good job. But it was one of those things where they tried to find people who were less than well-known to play in these miniseries, and then back them up with, like, a couple of named people. And, like, one of the things that they did, one of the things that the Harrison version did, is they took a lot of the, like, the Fremen, like it says, bulging sack remained at Stilgar's feet. He crouched, placed his palms against it. Someone came up beside him, crouched at his elbow. Paul recognized Chani's face in the hood shadow. John must carry 33 liters and 3/30 seconds drachms of the tribe's water, Chani said. I bless it now in the presence of the Sayadina. Akiri Akairi, this is the water. Felicin fallacy of Paul Muad'Dib. Kivi Akavi, never the more. Nakalas, Nakalas, to be measured and counted. Uker an, by the heartbeats, Jan of our friend, Shamis. In abrupt and profound silence, Chani turned, stared at Paul. Presently she said, Where I am flame, be thou the coals. Where I am dew, be thou the water. Bila Kaifa, intoned the troop. So that was one of the things that they leaned heavily into, was some of the... That's one of the things that Harrison leaned heavily into, was a lot of the language that the Fremen used, that Frank Herbert had incorporated into his writing. What they called Chakobsa and Botani Jib, I believe, is what he calls it. It was like, there's a part here in, and I just, so Jessica has just arrived on Arrakis. She's trying to do some things. Shutout Mapes comes into her, and she's got the knife. We see this in this version, and we also see it in the actual extended version of Dune. Linda Hunt's character of the Shutout Mape actually comes in with the Chris knife and gives it to Lady Jessica. Okay. And it says, only a water seller, my lady, but you've no need to interest yourself in such as they. The cistern here holds 50,000 liters, and it's always kept full. She glanced down at her dress. Why, you know, my lady, I don't even have to wear my stillsuit here, she cackled, and me not even dead. Jessica hesitated, wanting to question this Fremen woman, needing data to guide her, but bringing order of the confusion in the castle was more imperative. Still, she found the thought unsettling that water was a major mark of wealth here. My husband told me of your title, Shadout, Jessica said. I recognize the word. It's a very ancient word. You know the ancient tongues, then? Mapes asked as she waited with an odd intensity. Tongues are the Bene Gesserit's first learning, Jessica said. I know the Botani Jib and the Chakobsa, all the hunting languages. Mapes nodded. Just as the legend says. And Jessica wondered, why do I play out this sham? But the Bene Gesserit ways were devious and compelling. I know the dark things, and the ways of the Great Mother, Jessica said. She read the more obvious signs in Mapes' action and appearance than the petite trails. "Mrs. Precia," she said in the Chekopsa tongue, "Andral tepera, Trarasik buskari, Mrs. Precari." Mapes took a backward step, appeared poised to flee. "I know many things," Jessica said. "I know that you have borne children, that you have lost loved ones, that you have hidden in fear, and that you have done violence, and will yet do more violence. I know many things." In a low voice, Mapes said, "I meant no offense, my lady." "You speak of the legend and seek answers," Jessica said. "Beware the answers you may find. I know you came prepared for violence with a weapon in your bodice." "My lady, There's a remote possibility you could draw my life's blood," Jessica said, "but in doing so you'd bring down more ruin than your wildest fears could imagine. There are worse things than dying, you know, even for an entire people." "My lady," Mapes pleaded. She appeared about to fall on her knees. "The weapon was sent as a gift to you should you prove to be the one." "And the means of my death should I prove otherwise," Jessica said. She waited in the seeming relaxation that made the Bene Gesserit trained so terrifying in combat. "Now we see which way the decision tips," she thought. Slowly, Mapes reached into the neck of her dress, brought out the dark sheath. A black handle with deep finger ridges protruded from it. She took sheath in one hand and the handle in the other, withdrew a milk-white blade, held it up. The blade seemed to shine and glitter with light its own. It was double-edged like a kinjal, and the blade was perhaps 20 centimeters long. "Do you know this, my lady?" Mapes asked. It could be only one thing, Jessica knew, the fabled crysknife of Arrakis. The blade that had never been taken off the planet, and was known only by rumor and wild gossip. "It is a crysknife," she said. "Say it not lightly," Mapes said. "Do you know its meaning?" And Jessica thought there was an edge to that question. Here's the reason this Fremen has taken service with me, to ask that one question. My answer could precipitate violence, or what? She seeks an answer from me, the meaning of a knife. She's called the Shaddam in the Chekopsa tongue. Knife, that's death maker in Chekopsa. She's getting restive. I must answer now. Delay is as dangerous as a wrong answer. "It's a maker." Eee! Mapes wailed as it sounded both grief and elation. She trembled so hard the knife blade sent glittering shards of reflection shooting around the room. Jessica waited, poised. She had intended to say the knife was a maker of death, and then add the ancient word, but every sense warned her now that the deep training of alertness that exposed the meaning in the most casual muscle twitch. The key word was maker. Maker? Maker. Still, Mapes held the knife as though ready to use it. Jessica said, "Did you think that I, knowing the mysteries of the Great Mother, would not know the maker?" Mapes lowered the knife. "My lady, when one has lived with prophecy for so long, the moment of revelation is a shock." Jessica thought about the prophecy. The Sharia and the Panoplia Propheticus, the Bene Gesserit of the Missionaria Protectiva, dropped here in long centuries ago, long dead, no doubt, but her purpose accomplished. The protective legends implanted in these people against the day the Bene Gesserits need. Well, that day had come. So anyway, so there's that. And basically, that was one of the things that Harrison really tried to lean into, was that whole thing. And it was one of the first things that I noticed when in the Harrison version right here, Jessica goes into this one place that's like a conservatory, okay? And she's there's, she's built by and Shaddam Mapes says, built by off-worlders many years ago, to remind them of the things that they had to leave behind, right? Because there's trees and plants and all these kind of things. And so, and then that's when Jessica says that line of Mrs. Precia, and then goes on from that. And then she actually says it again when, and it's kind of funny because, if you take the subtitle from that and then put it into the next scene where she says it, you're like, what the fuck? Because it's basically what she says to Mapes, she says again to Stilgar and his troop when they meet up in the desert. And I think it's because she's trying to tell them that it's hey, I'm a Bene Gesserit. I know these tongues. I know your tongue. And it's something where, even during the ceremony of Jamis, Jessica's kind of off to the side, and she's recognizing certain things. Like, she's going, there was parts of, like, this culture and that culture and, like, these type of words in there. It's kind of interesting. Like, the Fremen, because the Fremen have a very deep culture that nobody understands. It's kind of like when somebody goes and studies, like, say, the Pygmies in Africa or some of the tribes in the Amazon, where nobody's ever visited them. And, you know, by modern standards, and I'm not saying this to mean, you know, anything to anyone, but I'm just saying that normally when we as civilized people, we look at them and we go, oh, they're just, you know, out there, you know, squatting in the bush. We don't realize that they have a lot of religion and a lot of, you know, things of their own, and, you know, like they have like a whole culture of their own that we don't realize because we're on the outside looking in. And that's kind of how you arrive on Dune, is you kind of see the Fremen from this kind of an outside lens looking in. And when you see it, at first you're kind of like, oh, they're just a bunch of, you know, I think even Yui says, oh, they're just will of the sand people that, you know, just walk around and do whatever they want, you know, and they're very violent and they're very, you know, this and you know, it's like, you won't be allowed to talk with them, young master, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going, yeah, you're going to eat those words. But the thing about it is also is that Paul himself is kind of like, he's seeing them in dreams, and, you know, it's like he's seeing places and he's seeing people and he's hearing, you know, people talk to him and stuff in dreams because he's having visions. And so that's one of the things that Donnie leans very heavily into in the very first, you know, kind of opening is this whole notion of, like, here's Chani going up and telling him things and doing things, and you know, he's seeing these dreams and he's doing these different things. But once he gets to Arrakis, he starts to see visions of the future, which is exactly what happens in here. Okay? Paul gets to Arrakis and he starts to have visions of the jihad. He starts to have the feelings of terrible purpose start to come out. And that's one of the things that Harrison leaned heavily into, was that notion of terrible purpose. There's a terrible purpose behind all of this, and that's one of the things that he kind of mentions, is that he's like, hey, you know, there's going to be this terrible purpose. And like, because like in one scene that I just read a few nights ago, he's basically standing there, Paul is, and his father tells him that he could be a mentat, like Thufir Hawat. Okay, and he says, you know, like, there's a point at which you have to tell the mentat, the potential mentat, what's happening to him, so that he can make the decision to either continue going on to become a mentat, or to reject the training and say, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, mentats are basically human computers, and they can calculate things. So it's like when you see in this movie, you see towards the beginning, when they're waiting for the Emperor, you know, the Emperor's craft to arrive, that big sphere to drop down, and he's like, how much would this cost, you know, again, and then it's like you see Thufir's eyes kind of go white, and then he's like, and then it comes back like a second later, and he's like, you know, 1,260,000 Solari, sir, you know, and that's what a mentat can do. They can make computations very, very quickly. And the more data they have, they can arrive at solutions to problems. Okay, and so Paul is sitting there after his dad leaves, and he's thinking, you know, after he finds out that he could be a mentat Duke, which, you know, would be very formidable, and he goes, he says something along the lines of, you know, I wonder if being a mentat is a terrible purpose. And he goes, but even as he thought it, his new awareness denied it. So it's like, it's basically saying that the terrible purpose had nothing to do with his being a mentad or anything like that. It had to do with the path that he was on. And because he was not supposed to be born at that time. Okay? What was actually supposed to happen, and this is a lore-related reason, and this is kind of relating back to what is going on, is originally the Bene Gesserit breeding program had gotten to the point where they were 2 generations away from the Kwisatz Haderach when Jessica was born. Okay? Jessica was to be the grandmother of the Kwisatz Haderach. Okay? She was to mate with Duke Leto, give him a daughter. That daughter was then going to be raised as a Bene Gesserit. And in secret, they went to Baron Harkonnen's brother, half-brother, Abelard Harkonnen, and gave him some fertility drugs, and he and his wife conceived a son, and that son became Fade Rautha. Okay? And then what was going to happen is that at a certain point, Fade was to wed the daughter of Jessica and Duke Leto, and that was going to be the Kwisatz Haderach. Okay? So Paul arrived 1 generation early. But the Bene Gesserit didn't want to think of that possibility. Which is why Gaius Helen Mohiam tried, so hard to make Paul fail. Is because she didn't want him to believe that he could be the one. Okay? And the thing is that, and I think in the movie she even, Gaius Helen Mohiam, played by Charlotte Rampling, actually says something along the lines of, you may or may not be the one, but even if you aren't, we may yet succeed. Kind of shrugging her shoulders like, you may be, you may not be. Doesn't matter to me. Okay? So, that being said, okay, the reason why I set this all up is because I need you to understand that because I've been reading this for 30 years, okay, I know it inside out and backwards, okay? I don't have it memorized like I do episode 4, but I know the subject material very, very well, okay? And this article was so poorly written that I'm not only admonishing the man who wrote it, but I'm admonishing the editor who posted it at cbr.com. Okay? Normally, when you see this kind of stuff, I normally see this on Screen Rant. In fact, I think one of my first videos on this channel was in response to Screen Rant and their 39 plot holes of The Force Awakens, which I completely demolished using basic common sense and lore. And that's what I'm going to do with this one. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start reading this article, and I'm going to post this article down below. It's called Part 2 Has a Chance to Fix a Controversial Part of the Frank Herbert Novel. Okay, down below, under link, in the description box, you'll see a little thing that says links, and then it will say original article, and then it will have a link. I would recommend, okay, go read this before you start the rest of this series, okay? And there's only going to be 2 or 3 videos. Because when I originally did this, it was 2.5 hours. So I thought, well, I'll give them a break. I will break it into some episodes, and I will talk about it in a way that makes sense, okay? Because I'm going to use the books, I'm going to use my knowledge, I'm going to basically show you that clickbaity bullshit articles like this need to fucking go, okay? Now, I can understand if somebody wants to sit down and nitpick Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, okay, or Star Wars Episode 8. Fine. But you can't be this far off base and call it a well-written, well-researched article. It's clickbaity bullshit that never should have been posted. And I'm admonishing not just CBR, I'm admonishing James Lynch, the guy who wrote it, and I'm admonishing the editors who allowed it to be posted. Because I'll tell you this, that was bullshit. That's some absolute fucking garbage. That this ever got posted to the internet. This day and age, when you can have, you could probably find the text for this on a PDF. In fact, I know you can. Because the Dune board game, okay, the Avalon Hill board game, you can go to Board Game Geek and search Dune the board game, 1970s edition, okay, and you can find the full PDF of the instruction manual, and in the back, 2 pages of that is almost the entire story of Dune, the original book. They put it there so that somebody who maybe hasn't read the book all the way through, or maybe hasn't read the book in a while, or maybe has no idea what the book is, can read it and kind of go, oh, okay, I kind of understand a little bit of what's going on. There's a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of backstabbing. There's a lot of stuff going on. Okay, makes sense to me now. Let's play. I don't even think this guy read the Cliff Notes. In fact, the first time I recorded this, I was pretty, generous in that respect. I was like, oh, well, maybe he read the Cliff Notes version and I don't even think he read the Cliff Notes version. Going back and reading this again, I don't think he read the Cliff Notes version. In fact, what I think happened was he probably watched the Harrison version a really long time ago, probably about 10 or 15 years ago, hasn't watched Dune since, and then went out and watched this movie and went, oh my god, what are they going to do about this? So, keep in mind as I read this article and I respond to it, that this guy has no idea what this book actually says. Okay? Just keep that in mind as I read through this article. Now, he's going to mention some parts of the book, and I'm sure he probably looked up a few things here and there, probably a Wikipedia article, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean that he knows what the story is or that he knows the lore behind it, okay? Because one of the things about the book is that Paul sees the jihad from a distance, through a mountain range, a keyhole, okay? He can see it looming out there, and it keeps getting closer and closer. The further on with the Fremen he gets, the further into the legendary status he gains, he starts to get that, okay? And I played the preview. I'm going to drop a link to the official trailer 2. Go about 2 minutes into that preview. It's about 3 minutes long. Go 2 minutes into that preview. Okay? Actually, about a minute and 45 seconds. And there's a point at which Gurney Halleck is walking with Paul. Okay? And he basically says to Paul, the prophet, why not use that? And Paul says, because every time I see something, happening, it's terrible. It's really bad. And Gurney's like, because you lose control? And Paul says, because I gain it. I gain control. That, to me, was very telling, because there's a couple of conversations that Paul has, not only with his mother, but also with Gurney, where he kind of talks about that. So they took about 5 to 10 pages of dialogue in this book and like crammed it into that one conversation. That's the mastery of Denis Villeneuve and at what he can do, okay? But that's not what this is talking about. Let's get into this. One of the most destructive chapters in the Dune novels could present a real challenge for the movies, but they have a chance to right some wrongs. Well, there's not really any wrongs to right, so let's keep on reading. Much of Dune's appeal lies in how it deals with complicated geopolitics in a universe that, although there's some kind of marked differences, retains many of the recognizable features of humanity as a whole. It is humanity. It's literally humanity about 12,000 to 15,000 years in the future from where we are right now. Okay, that's where Frank Herbert saw it. Because he foresaw a day when there might be some kind of AI that kind of takes over, and then that became the Butlerian Jihad, and then 10,000 years from that, okay, is where we are, 10,191. Okay? That's AG, after the guild was formed, the Spacing Guild. Okay? Is the year 10,191. In fact, let me read the first. A beginning is a time for taking the most delicate care that the balances are correct. This every sister of the Bene Gesserit knows. To begin your study of the life of Muad'Dib, then, take care that you place him in his time, born in the 57th year of the Padisha Emperor Shaddam IV, and take the most special care that you locate Muad'Dib in his place, the planet Arrakis. Do not be deceived by the fact that he was born on Caladan and lived his first 15 years there. Arrakis, the planet known as Dune, is forever his place. I thought it said 10,191. It probably says it in there somewhere, but anyway, you kind of get that, okay? So, basically, it's far into the future, okay? Not as far as, say, you know, Warhammer 40k, and not as grimdark, at least not yet. And he says, all of the unique houses and planetary inhabitants in the series are distant descendants of the original inhabitants of Earth who left the planet to inhabit the remote corners of the known universe. Yeah, the known universe is basically the galaxy. It's not different galaxies. It's just different solar systems in the galaxy. Okay? And how they get there is they use the Spacing Guild transports, the Highliners, and these guild navigators that can literally, like, they fold space. They basically, like, they see a planet, they have a planet, you know, they're at a planet, they see a planet, and they basically fold space to get there. Now, how Denis Villeneuve told that in his version is he had the Highliners as these, like, cylindrical objects where on one end, like they're literally looking down this long tube, and on one end is a completely different solar system, and then on this end is like Caladan, and over there is Kitane or something, and you're just like... So it's almost like they exist in like two places at once, which I thought was brilliant. I mean, I was like, that is the perfect way to show people that you're folding space, is to show that it's like on one end is in a different solar system than this end, which is in this solar system, and it's like the whole thing is existing in two places at once. That was perfect. It says, though this accounts for the many variations in appearances and attitudes between House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and others, all of them retain some more recognizable features of humanity. He just repeated himself. Again, as a writer myself, okay, granted, I'm not published, but as a writer myself, the worst sin that you could possibly create is repeating yourself in like, you know, in the span of like a paragraph, which, like, I think this is like 4 sentences. It's like, 1, 2... Yeah, there's only 3 sentences. And he repeats himself twice in 3 sentences. That's pathetic. Who let this get published like that? You should be fired. My God. Religions and worship remain prominent, and war between the factions is common. Combination of these two factors leads to one of the more troubling narrative threads in the original novels, Muad'Dib's Jihad. It's not troubling at all. Though undoubtedly one of the more memorable and enthralling story arcs, Dune Part 2 has a chance to portray it in a different and arguably more appropriate way. Okay. So, this guy seems to think that Paul's jihad starts as soon as he joins up with the Fremen, which it doesn't. Okay? Paul's jihad doesn't start until after the events of this book. Okay? And it concludes at the beginning of this. In fact, let me read this. Excerpts from the Death Cell interview with Bronso of Ix. Kisrit, what led you to take your particular approach to a history of Muad'Dib? Answer, why should I answer your questions? Because I will preserve your words. Ah, the ultimate appeal to a historian. Will you cooperate then? Why not? But you'll never understand what inspired my analysis of history. Never. You priests have too much at stake to try me. Try you? Well, again, why not? I was caught by the shallowness of the common view of this planet, which arises from its popular name. Dune. Not Arrakis, notice, but Dune. History is obsessed by Dune as a desert, as birthplace of the Fremen. Such history concentrates on the customs which grew out of water scarcity, and the fact that Fremen led semi-nomadic lives in stillsuits, which recovered most of their body's moisture. Are these things not true, then? They are surface truth, as well as ignore what lies beneath the surface as try to understand my birth planet, Ix, without exploring how we derived our name from the fact that we are the 9th planet of our sun? No. It is not enough to see Dune as a place of savage storms. It is not enough to talk about the threat posed by the gigantic sandworms. But such things are crucial to the Arrakeen character. Crucial, of course. But they produce a one-view planet in the same way that Dune is a one-cropped planet, because it is the sole and exclusive source of the spice melange. Yes, let us hear you expand on the sacred spice. Sacred! As with all things sacred, it gives with one hand and takes with the other. It extends life and allows the adept to foresee his future, but it ties him to a cruel addiction and marks his eyes as yours are marked, total blue without any white. Your eyes, your organs of sight, become one thing without contrast, a single view. Such heresy brought you to this cell. I was brought to this cell by you priests. As with all priests, you learned early to call the truth heresy. You are here because you dared to say Paul Atreides has lost something essential to his humanity before he could become Muad'Dib. Not to speak of his losing his father here in the Harkonnen War, nor the death of Duncan Idaho, who sacrificed himself that Paul and the Lady Jessica could escape. Your cynicism is duly noted. Cynicism? That, no doubt, is a greater crime than heresy. But you see, I'm not really a cynic. I'm just an observer and a commentator. I saw true nobility in Paul as he fled into the desert with his pregnant mother. Of course, she was a great asset as well as a burden. The flaw in you historians is that you never leave well enough alone. You see true nobility in the holy Muad'Dib, but you must append a cynical footnote. It's no wonder that the Bene Gesserit also denounce you. You priests do well to make common cause with the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. They, too, survive by concealing what they do, but they cannot conceal the fact that the Lady Jessica was a Bene Gesserit trained adept. You know she trained her son in the sisterhood's ways. My crime was to discuss this as a phenomenon, to expound upon their mental arts and their genetic program. You don't want attention called to the fact that Muad'Dib was the sisterhood's hoped-for captive messiah, that he was their Kwisatz Haderach before he was your prophet. If I had any doubts about your death sentence, you have dispelled them. I can die only once. There are deaths, and there are deaths. Beware, lest you make a martyr of me. I do not think Muad'Dib. Tell me, does Muad'Dib know what you do in these dungeons? We do not trouble the Holy Family with trivia. Laughter. And for this, Paul Atreides fought his way to a niche among the Fremen. For this, he learned to control and ride the sandworm. It was a mistake to answer your questions. But I will keep my promise to preserve your words. Will you really? Then listen to me carefully, you Fremen degenerate. You priest with no god except yourself. You have much to answer for. It was a Fremen ritual which gave Paul his first massive dose of melange, thereby opening him to visions of his futures. It was a Fremen ritual by which that same melange awakened the unborn Alia in the Lady Jessica's womb. Have you considered what it meant for Alia to be born into this universe fully cognitive, possessed of all her mother's memories and knowledge? No rape could be more terrifying. Without the sacred melange, Muad'Dib would not have become the leader of all Fremen. Without her holy experience, Alia would not be Alia. Without your blind Fremen cruelty, you would not be a priest. Ah, I know you Fremen. You think Muad'Dib is yours because he mated with Chani, because he adopted Fremen customs. But he was an Atreides first, and he was trained by a Bene Gesserit adept. He possessed disciplines totally unknown to you. You thought he brought you new organization and a new mission. He promised to transform your desert planet into a water-rich paradise, and while he dazzled you with such visions, he took your virginity. Such heresy does not change the fact that the ecological transformation of Dune proceeds apace. And I committed the heresy of tracing the roots of that transformation, of exploring the consequences. That battle out there on the plains of Arrakis may have taught the universe that Fremen could defeat Imperial Sardaukar. But what else did it teach? When the stellar empire of the Carino family became a Fremen empire under Muad'Dib, what else did the empire become? Your jihad took only 12 years, but what a lesson it taught. Now the empire understands the sham of Muad'Dib's marriage to the princess Irulan. You dare accuse Muad'Dib of sham. Though you kill me for it, it is not heresy. The princess became his consort, not his mate. Chani, his little Fremen darling, she's his mate. Everyone knows this. Irulan was the key to the throne, nothing more. It's easy to see why those who conspire against Muad'Dib use your analysis of history as their rallying argument. I'll not persuade you, I know that. But the argument of conspiracy came before my analysis. 12 years of Muad'Dib's jihad created the argument. That's what united the ancient power groups and ignited the conspiracy against Muad'Dib. So basically, this is where it goes wrong, is he says the jihad itself starts after the events of the first Dune movie, which see Paul Atreides join the Fremen, where he will go on to take the name Muad'Dib. He lived with the tribe, growing his reputation as a leader by leading them to many victories over the occupying Harkonnen forces, before eventually riding a sandworm and becoming fully ingratiated as one of their own. This would lead to a great victory for Paul and Fremen at the Battle of Arrakis. The Atreides Empire subsequently formed to replace the Imperium with Paul at its head, but what happens from here becomes known as Muad'Dib's jihad. True. But it's not told. When we come back, I will read the last chapter of this book to prove that this book does not talk about the jihad. The book that talks about the jihad is a book known as Paul of Dune. Okay, it was written by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, and they spent some time kind of like exploring like some of Paul's days on Caladan and his days as the Emperor as the jihad is sweeping through, okay, the universe, okay, and it covers that whole span. It kind of bridges, basically, it bridges Dune and Dune Messiah, you know, kind of like, but it tells the story from like Paul's point of view and like how he tried to stop the jihad on numerous occasions, but the Fremen just wouldn't be stopped, okay? And that was part of what goes on in this when it happens, okay? So anyway, smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you think of this thing. Are you excited for this movie? I cannot wait for November because Dune Part 2 is going to be awesome. There is a link to trailer, official trailer number 2 I would highly suggest that you go check it out because it is epic. In fact, in the next episode, I will show you a picture, and then you can actually compare it with what you saw in the actual preview, and you will go, oh my god, they actually got it. So, anyway, as we say, we will see you on the next one.